You guys remember this thing, right? The GT1030. This one happens to be DDR5, 2 gig of memory on the board itself, and it's actually low profile, so it will fit in a slimline, or with the regular riser cable, it will fit in the old HP here. The old HP has a Ryzen 5 5600G, and so seeing as how I already tested this against the 4600G, thought I'd take a whack at the 5600G, see what happened there. Okay, so the test I ran with the 4600G showed that this is about on par, which is what I pretty much thought and said all along, is that 4600G was about the same performance as 1030. Now, did not quite remember at the time, or misplaced my thoughts, or whatever might have happened, that this comes in a DDR4 and a DDR5 variety. You want to make sure that if you're going to get one, you get the DDR5. Don't get spoofed into, rooked into, tricked into, ignorant of the fact that there is a DDR4 version that is much, much worse than this. About half to about 60% of the performance of this, the DDR5 version of the GT1030. Now, why am I focusing on this? Because we also know that the 5600 and the 4600, the results there are they're not comparable. The 5600 edges it out in pretty much every category and does a much better job. So I would thought, okay, if the 4600 and this are pretty much on par, let me see how these compare, and if it's actually a step backwards or just about the same kind of step or whatever have you. And what I found was actually pretty interesting. Now, this is not a GPU solution. This is, if you've got right now the 5600 retails for about $260. It seems to be widely available, which I did not think was going to be the case, quite honestly. The 5700 has 2 more cores. It has one more Vega thread in it, so it's 8 instead of 7, and it retails for about $100 more. I think that the 5600G is the much better value. It is comparable with the 3600X. I have not tested against the 5600X yet, but what I've seen so far is that because of the buffer size of the L3 cache, I believe it is, being larger on the 5600X, the 5600X will actually beat it. But the 5600G is a great processor. 6-core, 12-thread. It is Zen 3. It is 7 nanometer. It is fantastic. It's a solid CPU and a decent GPU. I say that loosely because it's not actually a GPU, it's a graphics processor built onto the chip, but my point remains the same. So what I did is I went ahead and tried to see if I couldn't just compare these two, the GT1030 and the 5600, to see if you're losing anything. A lot of people might have a 3600X or might have a 1600 or 2600 or any of those and not be able to lay their hands on a decent GPU, or it died on them. And are you losing anything by going with the 1030? Probably going to lose a little bit, but we'll make that comparison and we'll kind of see. And so we started, this time I've actually done my benchmarks slightly different as well. I've taken out Dirt 5 because Dirt 5, I'm replacing with another one, and Borderlands and Dirt 5 both gave me a good temperature reading of like the max temps that I would get. And Borderlands 3, I think, is a little bit different type of genre. I think it fits better in this group of testing. But I'm going to go ahead and do Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We're doing Borderlands 3. We're going to do Far Cry 5. We are doing Horizon Zero Dawn. We're doing Forza Horizon 4, which will replace Dirt 5. And I'm also doing World War Z. So keeping CSGO because that's our esports title, but we'll run through these and we'll figure out an order which they're going in. We'll kind of loosely stay with the old order, but as we go through here, we'll kind of show you. And the first one I always do Shadow of the Tomb Raider first. The 4600G with the 1030 actually did better than the 5600G with the 1030. Not quite sure why that is. However, the 5600 still beat both of them. And it was actually playable at 1080p on low settings. It's playable, I mean, it reaches 30 frames per second, which is That's a decent experience for a game like this. It's not a first-person shooter experience, but you're playing a procedural type of a role-playing almost game. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider works very, very well at 30 frames per second. That's what the consoles are set at anyway, and it looks pretty good. And at 1080p, you can get away with it at 30 frames per second. It does even better at the lower resolutions, but you can get away with that, and you'll do fine. Borderlands 3 was a little bit of a struggle for both. Neither one of them did that well, but we could manage to get 60 frames per second at 720p low on the 5600G. So while it's not a great experience, it is a little bit faster moving game than, say, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It is playable. Go ahead and 720p low. You might get away with 900p low and still get a decent frame rate, but it's playable. It looks pretty decent. And if that's what you got, that's what you got. We didn't have to worry too much about temps here. This is normally the one where I'd find out what my temperatures were on my GPU, but that little 1030, it just doesn't put off enough heat for that fan not to be able to handle it. Far Cry 5, very similar to Shadow of the Tomb Raider in this respect. They had very similar scores and easily playable at 900p or 720p for either one of them. Didn't have any kind of issues here, and they both looked pretty decent and they played pretty well. Forza Horizon 4, I'm swapping in for Dirt 5, mainly because I don't need two games that will show how my GPU temps will react, and both that and Borderlands 3 did. Both the cards did okay here. The 5600G actually did very, very well with actually getting 30 frames per second on 1080p Ultra. Yes, that's 30 frames per second on 1080p Ultra. So you can see it did very, very well on the rest of it. Surprised me very much, but this game will have no problems running on the 5600G, and it shouldn't have much of a problem running on the 1030. World War Z is one of the other new games that I added, and this is the first big victory for the dedicated GPU. That 1030 with 2 gigs of memory on it, as opposed to the 5600's 512, it made a big difference. I think the reason why is because it had that dedicated memory on the card itself and didn't have to borrow from the system memory. It did really, really well and surprised me, and it outplayed the 5600 by a fair amount. But just when you thought, oh, I'll just go ahead and settle the GT1030, a game like Horizon Zero Dawn comes by and just slaps that dedicated video card silly. It couldn't even manage 30 frames per second on 720 low. So the 5600 did much better in this. I think it does a better job of borrowing system memory than that 2 gig on the graphics card trying to borrow the extra memory that it had. This is one of the 2 games that I got the warning message, hey, if you don't have enough specs to run this, are you sure you want to try it anyway? In which case you hit yes, and it'll continue on. The 1030 really stumbled here, really had some issues, and the 5600 actually seemed to do a pretty good job, pretty efficient job of borrowing that system memory and doing pretty well overall. And like I said, that 1030 couldn't even hit 30 frames per second. In CSGO, another title that we always test, the last one that I ran on this, it kind of redeemed itself. The GT1030 redeemed itself, and you could see that the 5600 and the 1030 both ran equally well in this, so I don't think you'll have any kind of problem at all with any kind of esports titles, anything of that sort. It'll do just fine for you. And so what is my conclusion of all this? If all you can get a hold of, if you don't have a GPU right now, or you're trying to buy older hardware and you've got say something that doesn't even have an HDMI port, which is the case with that Dell Optiplex. That's the one thing I noticed there. It had a VGA out. Or if you're trying to upgrade something, or you're trying to figure something out and all you can lay your hands on is something like a GT1030, then it's okay to do that. Don't spend a lot of money on this card. You're going to find, like I said, there's 2 flavors of this. There's DDR4 and DDR5. Make sure you get the DDR5 and look around and shop around, because even though they're out there, you can find them all day long at like $140 or $150. Do not pay anything like that. That's ridiculous. If you are on the AMD platform and you're looking at upgrading anyway, maybe that 5600 is the way to go for you. If you were thinking about going, especially because Windows 11 it doesn't work well with the 1600, the 1700X or anything like that, the original Zen platform. Maybe if you're looking at upgrading anyway and you're going to that 5000 series, that 5600G might be the way you go. And until you get a graphics card or something like that, it's more than capable of handling most of these titles. There's, like I said, I've changed these around a little bit, trying to change the benchmarks around. I realized that by picking some of the ones I did to begin with, I picked some really brutal titles for this to run the gauntlet on, especially with some of the hardware I've been testing. But as I widen out the search a little bit, I come more of a cross section of other games, it seemed to do pretty well and it's pretty solid. And it really surprised me on things like Forza Horizon 4, where I could even run it at 1080p Ultra and not have any issues with it. So my advice, if you do have a 5600G, stick to those low settings. 1080p low you can get away with in most games. Most of the time it's going to be 900p, sometimes 720p. And if you're stuck using something like a GT1030 DDR5, your best bet is to go with 720p. And don't feel bad about going at 720p. That's high definition, don't forget. Remember, we used to have sets that were a different configuration. They weren't 16 by 9, I'm talking about 16 across by 9 deep, or 16 across by 9 high, basically, that aspect ratio, so you have the rectangle. We used to have stuff that was square, stuff that was really weird looking, and 800 by 600 and things like that. So by adopting the HD, it actually looks pretty decent. You're not losing a lot in game experience, and you'll get used to it pretty quickly. It's sort of like the first time you played Borderlands, when you notice everything graphically is really weird and it kind of weirds you out for a minute, but then you forget about it. The game is so good, you just get into it and it becomes fun, and it's one of those games that you want more of every time you get to play in it. So I don't know if it's been helpful or not. I hope it is. Entertaining, helpful, hopeful, whatever the case may be. If you found it useful at all, go ahead and throw a like on it. If not, then you can hit the dislike, but let me know why, so I know what I can fix or I know what I can do for you in the future. I'm really trying hard to get to the 500 subscribers by the end of the year, so I can start getting on some of these affiliate programs. So if you're not already subscribed, please hit that red bar at the bottom and subscribe for me. And if you have any questions about any of these, I'll be glad to try to help. You know, comments are always welcome. I always try to respond to them as quickly as I can. And good luck. I mean, I know that they're talking about the GPU market not being able to ease up until sometime next year now. So I don't know what situation you might be in, or if you're just curious about, you know, system building or trying to help a friend or whatever the thing might be. But I'm here to try to help. And like I said, my focus now for a little while, since new stuff is so hard to get, is just concentrating on helping kind of fill out those areas in the older hardware and see where we can go from there. So there will be some newer stuff too, but there's also going to be some older stuff like this, trying to figure out what to do with the stuff that you might already have, or maybe that's the only thing you can get a hold of. So until next time, folks, that really is all I got. I'm going to be taking a look at Windows 11. It gets released this week, and I'm not really sure if I'm in favor of it. I do have some computers that just will not run it. I've got 2 or 3 of them that there's no hope, and I won't be able to upgrade. So I'll let you know what I think about that later in the week as I start to do this. I do want to at least upgrade some of it because the gaming performance is supposed to be better, and I'll have to compare Windows 10 versus Windows 11. So that's where we are. But until next time, folks, that's all I got. So I'll see you later.